recommend Gifted Homeschoolers Forum to so many parents. But today we're going to be talking about you, not about your kids. So, do you ever feel like you used to be gifted? It's very difficult to be a parent and to feel gifted, especially if you're a homeschooling parent, because you can't ever complete a sentence without being interrupted. And you might not have thought about your own giftedness. You might not have had time. You were too busy. But if you had siblings or cousins or friends and you were surrounded by gifted people in your childhood, you wouldn't even know what giftedness is. It would simply be the water you swam in. But if you think that that only your child is gifted, think again. Your child was not delivered by the stork. And if you don't think you're gifted, then how do you think you got a gifted child? Did you create one like a yuppie pasta? And maybe you should give everybody the recipe, or maybe you could sell it. But seriously, the apple does not fall far from the tree. And we have a great deal of hereditary research on this that verifies this. If you have a gifted child, guess what? So if you're still convinced that you aren't gifted, then do you think everyone else is just stupid? So here's your choice. You either recognize your own giftedness and you become more patient with your coworkers and with all the people in your life who are not as fast mentally as you are, or you think of yourself as average. I am not going to take that gifted label. And then you believe everybody else is stupid. And for those of you who still refuse to believe you're gifted, I'm going to give you a test. Has anyone ever asked you any of these questions any time in your life? Why do you make everything so complicated? Why do you take everything so seriously? And why is everything so important to you? If you failed this test, you fit the bill. So these are called the terrible twos. The gifted are too everything, too sensitive, too intense, too driven, too honest, too idealistic, too moral, too perfectionistic, and too much for other people. But those are gifted problems. I remember many years ago, I was invited to give a keynote address at the first conference on gifted women at the University of Washington. And I had tried to prepare for it, but for some reason I could not seem to figure out what they needed. And I did put something together, but when I walked into the auditorium, I just threw the speech out. Everybody looked so uncomfortable. And I just said, okay, none of you thinks you belong here. So tell me why you're so certain you're not gifted. And I did a story starter. I'm not gifted because, and these are the kinds of answers that were typical. I have a terrible memory. I couldn't concentrate during lectures. I wasn't an A student. I was a troublemaker. I didn't do well on my SATs. I didn't enjoy reading. I could never do math. And I'm just an overachiever. Now, think about all of these and ask yourself, would any of these descriptors disqualify you from joining Mensa? Uh, Probably not. So let's talk a little bit about overachievement. Do you think of yourself as just an overachiever? I asked a group to define an overachiever for me, and here is what they said. Choice responses. Someone who thinks that second place is the first loser. Someone who doesn't know the word no. Someone who sets a goal and not only achieves it, but goes beyond. Someone who compensates for weaknesses by putting in hours above and beyond. Someone who sets unrealistic goals and then meets them. Really? Seriously? And how exactly does that work? Someone who puts work above relationships. someone who chooses not to delegate, someone who gets ulcers worrying over insignificant details, someone who is trying to achieve someone else's goals, someone who has to be absolutely perfect, someone who is not satisfied unless they get an A, someone who goes beyond the requirements, someone who always makes extra work for themselves. But here is my number one fave: someone who exceeds their potential. If a child we test has a higher achievement score, Heidi Lags going, what? That's a psychology joke. If you have a higher achievement score than an IQ score, then that calls the IQ score into question. Okay, so have you ever taken a test in your whole life that you studied really, really, really hard for, but the instructor asked you questions you hadn't studied? So what happened? You got a lower score than you deserved. And that's because no test, no test of any kind can assess all that we know. It can only test your performance at that moment on that slice of information. So if you've taken an IQ test, an achievement test, an aptitude test, a class test, every single one of those is an underestimate of your ability, because competence is always greater than performance. If you buy what I've just said, nod your head in agreement if you agree with competence is higher than performance. If you agree with that, then how is there such a thing as an overachiever? The term is an oxymoron. When I've asked groups of teachers to close their eyes and to name the first underachiever that they think of in their mind, and then I ask them to close their eyes and name the first overachiever that they can think of, do you know what happens? 90% of the underachievers are male. 90% of the overachievers are female. What's wrong with this picture? You can achieve less than your potential. It is possible to be an underachiever, but you can't achieve more. So if you know someone who calls themselves an overachiever, tell them to cut it out. The term is used more often to describe women, and it denigrates female intelligence. It ought to be banned. I think there should be an Overachievers Anonymous society where anyone who's been brainwashed into thinking that they're an overachiever can get a dose of reality. I believe that giftedness is a psychological reality with lifelong ramifications. That's what I wrote about in Giftedness 101. And this I wrote about in Counseling the Gifted and Talented on the very first page. Cognitive complexity gives rise to emotional depth and sensitivity. Thus, the gifted not only think differently from their peers, they also feel differently from their peers. It's probably because of your child's emotional reactions to school that you're homeschooling. School was emotionally crippling. I want to tell you a recent anecdote. This is a child we tested who was 6 years old, and mom wrote that she least enjoys extremely boring language arts activities in school. She complained about deep despair. This is her words. Deep despair at school, saying that if she has to do one more year of silly K through 1 phonics and easy words, she will burst into tears. And she said, how many times do I keep proving to her that I know the letters so that she can start to give me challenging work? But that's not my only story about 6-year-olds. I must have a half a dozen or more. One boy said to his parents, they're not teaching me anything new there. I'm not going back. You're going to have to homeschool me. So he ordered his parents to homeschool him. We had a girl who was assigned coloring 3 bunnies and 2 bunnies, and coloring 3 kangaroos and 2 kangaroos. and coloring 3 bears and 2 bears. And she got so exasperated, she ripped up the paper and said, I'm not doing this anymore. What difference does it make whether they're bunnies or kangaroos or bears? It's all the same. But my favorite, this is a little girl who's asked her mother, Mommy, is 2 plus 3 5? And her mother said, yes. Mommy, was 2 plus 3 5 yesterday? And her mother said, of course. And she said, Mommy, will 2 plus 3 be 5 tomorrow? And her mother said, well, yes, silly. Why are you asking? She said, then why are they teaching it to us over and over and over again? So this is the life of the gifted child in a traditional regular classroom where there's no differentiation. Giftedness creates qualitatively different experiences, and that's all the way through the lifespan. If giftedness were understood as an organizing principle, like intellectual disability is, it would be apparent that a person does not outgrow giftedness no more than anyone outgrows significant intellectual disability. The issues faced by this group in childhood simply morph into new variations in adulthood. So, what is it like to be a gifted adult? Giftedness creates a different organization of the self. Do you have a mind that never turns off? My husband used to ask me, don't you ever get tired of thinking? As if I had a choice there. Having an unusual mind makes gifted children and adults feel cut off from the rest of society, out of sync with classmates and colleagues and coworkers. It also means feeling responsible for everything. Do you make lists? I made lists from the time I was 11. Does your mind continually generate wonderful ideas of things that you would like to be able to do if there were only more hours in the day? And learning to control a highly creative mind is like trying to lasso a buffalo in an open field. It basically goes wherever it wants to. And creative ideas show up at the most inopportune times. You're in the middle of making love. Wait, I got to write this down. It's silly. Gifted people often wear many hats, and they try to juggle more than it's humanly possible. All of it seems interesting and worthwhile if there were only an infinite number of hours in the day. And the gifted set standards for themselves that are way beyond other people's. They're never satisfied with a good enough job. That's not gifted language, good enough. But few people really understand the most painful part of being gifted. Few grasp the fundamental experience, the outsider status in a society suspicious of outsiders. This is a lifelong issue for the gifted, from the playgroup to the nursing home. But there's an upside. The gifted are visionaries who change the world by their very presence. Impossible dreams are realized, unrealistic goals achieved, insurmountable obstacles surmounted by people whose vision is a more powerful reality than the limitations that most of the world accepts as real. So, what were you like as a child? Were you this kid that never stopped asking why? Were you unusually curious? Did you have a strong sense of fairness? Did you have a great sense of humor? Were you highly sensitive? Did you have an amazing imagination? Did you thrive on challenge? Did you love collecting things? Did you argue with people? Did you have passionate interests? Are these characteristics still true? So I created a giftedness in adults rating scale. And you can find it at our website, www.gifteddevelopment.org. I'll just give you a few of the items. There's actually 38 of them. But these are just a few of the ones. And we have not personally validated this scale, but other people have. And it's been chosen for research studies by at least 3 different people that I know of who have done reliability and validity studies on it. And a group in Malaysia found that it predicted ethical development in adults and creativity in adults. So if you're interested in it, just go to our website and you can get it. Are you a good problem solver? Do you understand new ideas quickly? Do you have an extensive vocabulary? Do you have a good long-term memory? Not your short-term memory, that doesn't count. Can you concentrate on your interests for a long period of time? Are you unusually compassionate? Do you often take a stand against injustice? Are you insightful? So those are just a few of them. Now I want you to think of all the ways your child is like you were as a child. Thank you for the head nodding. Which is harder for you? How your child is like you or how your child is unlike you? Were you cooperative as a child? If you were, did you expect your child to be cooperative like you were? And then you were shocked when your child wasn't? So I don't know if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI, or if you've taken it yourself. But there's been a lot of research that has been done on the gifted, on children and on adults. Most gifted children are Ps. P stands for perceiver. They prefer play over work. Many gifted adults are the opposite. They're Js. Js are judgers. They put work before play. Perceivers like to keep their options open. They're very spontaneous. They like to look at all the possibilities. Js like closure. Js invented deadlines. Ps think deadline is a suggestion, not a reality. So are you a J or a P? And when did you become a J? The reason I ask that question is introversion and extroversion on the Myers-Briggs are inborn characteristics. But J and P, I don't think are inborn characteristics. I think they can be, but they can be, you can teach yourself to be a judger when you started out a perceiver. And I think the research on giftedness bears this out. Research shows that most gifted children are perceivers. And it shows that most of their teachers are judgers, which is the reason you homeschool. One of the reasons you homeschool is that there's a mismatch between their personality and the teacher's personality. But there's also research that shows that the number of gifted kids that become Js changes in high school. And when I've done family counselor and we've had counselors at our office, the biggest source of animosity and friction that I see in families is usually a J father and a P teen. And it's always made me wonder if gifted kids started out as Ps and then they chose to be Js, is this something that a dad who started out being a perceiver and forced himself to become a judger so that he could support a family is really angry at his son for being a perceiver, then he can't be. If you are a J who was once a P, do you resent your child for choosing play when you can't? So my advice is get in touch with your inner P. Okay, here's a cartoon I found that was perfect for J's and P's. The J's obviously had done their shopping in April or March for Christmas, and I think this is probably Christmas Eve. But if the bear is a perceiver, I want to tell you that on Christmas Eve, that's when the prices are lowest. Another part of the Myers-Briggs is introversion and extroversion. And maybe you already know whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I'm going to give a little brief on that. Most gifted children are introverts, but the higher the child's IQ and the higher the adult's IQ, the more likely the individual will be introverted. Here's a cartoon I found on the introvert and the extrovert at Christmas. So here's just the most important thing is the first one. Where do you get your energy from? Extroverts get energy from interaction. Introverts get energy from inside themselves. That's the most important difference you need to know. Extroverts tend to be open and trusting. Introverts need privacy. Extroverts don't understand that. Extroverts think out loud. Please, we don't have control over that. That is how we are wired. Introverts think before they talk, they mentally rehearse, and they wish everyone else would do the same. Extroverts learn by doing, introverts learn by observing. Extroverts have many friends, introverts are only loyal to very few friends throughout their lifetime. Extroverts adapt quickly, introverts need time to adjust. Extroverts think fast on their feet. Introverts need time to think. I remember when I talked about extroversion and introversion at a conference in Albuquerque one year. And the next year, I happened to run into some of the people who were in the audience, and they said, "Weren't you the person who talked about introverts and extroverts?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I got to tell you a story. I told my class about introversion and extroversion, and they knew which kids were the introverts. And I heard a whole group of kids go up to one boy and say, 'Now we really need your input on this. Now think about it and get back to us.'" So the next three are really funny: distractible, impulsive, and risk takers. If you know anything about ADHD, you know that those are three major indicators of ADHD. So I did this with an audience, a group of parents of gifted children, and this father asked me, "So what's the difference between ADHD and extroversion?" And I was sort of shocked by the question. And then I looked and saw what he was seeing. And I said, "Well, now that's a really good question." I think that extroversion exacerbates ADHD. And if you're an introvert with ADHD, it's a check and balance against it. So introverts who have ADHD are more likely to outgrow a lot of the impulsivity, the lack of breaks. Whereas there's no check and balance. If you're an extrovert, ADHD is going to be your friend for life, probably. But a lot of people don't understand that introversion is a good thing. Even the Big Five model is anti-introversion, sees it as a problem. But there are benefits to introversion. There are more national merit scholars who are introverts. Introverts have higher grade point averages. They're less distracted by their social lives. They read more. They're leaders in academic, aesthetic, and technical fields. So if as a kid you weren't popular because you were too introverted to be popular and only the extroverts were, in adult life, in these areas of expertise, popularity is based on your work and your influence, not on your personality. Introverts have more successful marriages. They have fewer conflicts with others. They're more reflective. They have an advantage during midlife. I only wish, as an extrovert, somebody had taught me when I was younger how to introvert. For me, it's a verb. Because when you're in midlife, your job is to develop the opposite part of your personality. Introverts, from the day they leave their home, they're learning how to put on an extroverted persona. But extroverts aren't taught to become more introverted as they get older. And here's one that most people don't know about, but introverts have longer lifespans than extroverts. Of course, it could be because they're more cautious, and extroverts do stupid things sometimes that end their lives. So, if you are gifted, you are intense, you are complex, you are sensitive, You are perfectionistic, you are idealistic, you're probably mission driven, and you are indignant about injustices that no one else even notices. These are what I call gifted problems. But we do have some gifted adults who have been wounded by their giftedness. I call them the walking wounded. They feel estranged and lonely, not even realizing that it's their own giftedness that's at the heart of the experience. Many feel that there's something wrong with them that's not fixable. And many feel like imposters waiting to be unmasked. The gifted struggle constantly between integrity and accommodation, viewing all of life as a complex set of ethical dilemmas. Were you a perfectionist or are you perfectionistic now? Is it any wonder that your child is a perfectionist? I may be the only psychologist on the planet who thinks perfectionism is a good thing. I want my brain surgeon to be a perfectionist. Thank you very much. I would like my mechanic to be a perfectionist. It does come with giftedness. So, what is it like to live with intense, sensitive, energetic, argumentative, perfectionistic children? And what if you also fit this description? One would hardly expect to find calm, peaceful households. And the research shows that gifted individuals often do not come from calm, peaceful households. And someone named Robert Albert did a study, and he wrote, the creative person to be comes from a family that is anything but harmonious, one which has built into its relationships, its organization of roles, and its levels of communication a good deal of tension, if not disturbances at time, what he termed a wobble. Although gifted families may be a bit wobbly, they are also very exciting and alive. Mothers need great stamina given their children's high energy levels and their penchant for not sleeping. Maybe you've got one of those non-sleepers. But my favorite story is this mother who adopted this child. When other babies were getting 12 hours of sleep, she wrote, I was lucky if he slept 6 hours. I figured he was smarter than other children his age because he had been awake twice as long. Parents of intensely gifted, non-sleeping children tend to be very tired. But I have to tell you something that I have learned from some homeschooling parents. In some families, they have a different biorhythm. And I know homeschoolers who homeschool at night because that's when the whole family is more alert. Anything worth feeling is worth feeling intensely. Nothing is simple, bland, or colorless. Everything in a gifted family is electrically charged with rich, multicolored layers of meaning. I call it living opera. So, yes, you may not have the calmest, most routine, easy to get along with family in the world, but you have a family that generates creativity. Embrace your own delightful quirkiness. Then you can embrace your children's quirkiness. The more you understand your giftedness, and the more you understand your children's characteristics and needs, the better parent you're capable of being. If you struggled as a child, you do not want your child to struggle. I understand that. If you suffered as a child, you certainly do not want your child to suffer. But you cannot protect your children from pain. You can only help them develop the strength to overcome adversity. Pain comes with being alive. This does not mean that you force your child to endure an unchallenging school. You create the very best learning environment you can in your own home. And then you trust. Take comfort in the journey you will travel together hand in hand throughout your lifetime. Whether you were identified as gifted as a child or missed, you need to own your own giftedness as an adult. Giftedness is part of your identity. You cannot fully understand yourself or others without embracing your giftedness, and do it for your children. You are your children's role model. If you're allergic to the term gifted, you can't expect them to honor their own giftedness. A parent wrote this to me decades ago, and it's always touched me. Every gift contains a danger. Whatever gift we have, we are compelled to express. And if the expression of that gift is blocked, distorted, or merely allowed to languish, then the gift turns against us and we suffer. But there is good news. In adulthood, exceptional qualities and abilities can lead to a life vision, creating a sense of purpose larger than life, larger than yourself, the ultimate outcome of a gifted life. A long time ago, I was approached by Singh to provide 100 words of wisdom about gifted adults. And so you might have seen this has been floating around internet for many, many years. Giftedness is not what you do or how hard you work. It is who you are. You think differently. You experience life intensely. You care about injustice. You seek meaning. You appreciate and strive for the exquisite. You are painfully sensitive. You are extremely complex. You cherish integrity. Your truth-telling has gotten you into trouble. Should 98% of the population find you odd, seek the company of those who love you just the way you are. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You are utterly fascinating. You are a gift to the world. You are needed. Your gifts are needed in the world. Never forget that. Thank you. Okay, questions?